So I'm here with Adam, and we're just going to talk a little bit about social media strategies at The Economist. So first and foremost, Adam, what would you say you're trying to achieve with social media?
We want more people to read or watch or listen to Economist content. We conceive of our audience as the globally curious, that's what we call them, people who are really interested in everything that's going on in the world, in lots of different spheres, politics and business, science, the arts, etc. That's the breadth of our content. And we know that we have built a big audience on social media, and we know that social media can help us to reach a big audience increasingly. And so really what we're seeking to do is to deliver content to more and more people through social media. And that's kind of the order number one. And then the second one is to really take on this responsibility that I think that newspapers, journalists, editors have of actually hosting debate and discussion around that content, especially content like ours, which is quite spiky and punchy and political. And I think that my job is audience engagement within the editorial department specifically. So I really think that once you've reached a lot of people with the content, then it's really your responsibility as a publisher and as a journalist actually to facilitate conversation around that content. And overriding both of those two orders, as it were, is the business model that underpins The Economist journalism, which is subscriptions. So the bigger the audience that we see and the bigger amount of engagement that we see, number one and number two together there, the more likely people are to subscribe. And that's really what we're ultimately trying to do, is reach more people with the content and obviously sell more subscriptions.
You've mentioned that it's an instrumental process. What do you mean by that?
I mean that audience engagement used to be something that I think people thought would be possible on social media without a lot of levers and nuts and bolts behind the scenes on the part of the publisher. And I think that what we've seen over the past few years is publishers taking on more and more of that responsibility to actually really use the nuts and bolts to foster that conversation. So when I use the word instrumental, I mean that me as an audience engagement editor, it's my job to use all of the instruments that I have, Facebook groups, online Q&As, different formats on Twitter, etc., to very actively foster the conversation around our content, rather than just lobbing the content at the audience and then running away and hoping that the audience will have that conversation. Instrumental means really being active as an editor in supporting and fostering that conversation by using those tools.
So last question, when you talk about using Quora or a Facebook group or Twitter, how do you make the decision about which platforms to be on and what's the process behind that?
Yeah, well, it depends, because there are some things that you want to do because you know that they'll reach a big audience. So we want to do lots of activity on Facebook because it's a very big audience, but then we also know that the bigger the audience, the lower the quality of conversation that can happen on that platform. Often those two things are sort of inversely proportional. Facebook's a really good example. That's why we've created two so far, Facebook groups. They are a much smaller subset of our big audience on Facebook. And within those groups, we're being much more instrumental than we are on our Facebook page in hosting conversation. And so it's that payoff between big versus engaged, or or wide versus high quality. So that's with regard to Facebook. Other ones really we choose because we think they are the right thing to do, as it were, for our audience. So we joined Medium a couple of years ago when Medium was emerging as a platform for often very thoughtful and well-considered content. And because we were already producing that in our newspaper and on our website, we thought that that was a natural fit, and that the kind of audience that Medium as a company was trying to build, and that writers who publish on Medium were trying to build around their work, was very similar to ours. So even though it's a relatively small audience, medium will never probably be as big as Facebook or Snapchat is, it's the right audience for us. And so we make that calculation not based on the size, but on the type and the quality of the audience. So you're all the time balancing those things, the breadth and the reach with the quality and the nature of the engagement that you want to have as well.